Hello YouTube, Kevin here for Superpower Broadcasting. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the delusion and ultimately the self-defeating and useful idiocy of those who claim, quote, Russia is our friend in the West. And I'm going to be discussing the viciousness and the reality of Putin and his regime, and what his plans for the West ultimately entail, and how this is a grotesque misunderstanding and outright, I would argue, just phenomenally bad understanding of international relations if you happen to fall into that crowd of essentially Putin is our friend. Putin is anti-imperialist. Putin is a victim of Western liberalism. Putin was betrayed by NATO. Putin has his own way of doing things, and we should let him be. Or, of course, the other one, when it comes down to this is, and I discussed this in a video that I did on the myth of Russia as the savior of the West, where I debunked it. Well, the other one that's often given is that, well, Russia is the beacon of a country free from degeneracy and interracialism, and they should save the West, basically, from degeneracy and interracialism. That's usually another argument that's posited out there. So, in this video, I'm going to be discussing the insanity, the self-defeating nature of these arguments, how they undermine your own, if you happen to be in this camp, if you happen to find yourself in this camp from the left or the right, that this is something that is as bad for you and your future by playing into this narrative as it was for all those true believing communists in Italy and France and elsewhere in Europe that ultimately defected in the 1930s to the Soviet Union and were promptly rounded up and shot in the head against a wall for being suspected spies or fascist fifth columns or agents of the West, even though they were foolish communists who were going to go over there and build the communist dreamland. Well, it turned out they got to see what the communist dreamland worked, how it worked, what it looked like. It looks pretty dark after that bullet goes in your head, right? So that's how this works. This is the second decade of the 21st century. This is not the 1930s. Yet we have now all of a sudden this same narrative of Russia as this beacon of anti-imperialism and sovereignty and the lack of degeneracy and this utopia, this rose-eyed glasses approach to Russia. And well, almost all of the descriptors that I laid out, all the narratives that I laid out in the beginning of this video, seem on face value to be something that the right wing would by and large fall into, something that the alt-right would fall into wholly. Well, the problem is there are tankies on the left that actively embrace this model. In fact, I would be willing to wager, though I don't have any statistics on this, that most of the Westerners who watch Russia today, and Russia today largely exists as a media export abroad. Most Russians do not watch Russia today. They watch Russia 1 or other state television networks that cater to Russians in Russia. The English Russia Today, which has all the millions of subscribers on YouTube and is carried on all kinds of Western television networks or television providers, I should say, all those services that provide television that you can subscribe to, they all ultimately carry this channel. On this channel, RT has hundreds of millions of viewers a year, and hundreds of millions of views a year, and has hundreds of thousands. I've seen some estimates that put it at either the third or fourth largest foreign television station in Canada, and it's also somewhat high in the United States as well. And so there are people out there, and by and large the Westerners who watch RT identify as progressives. They identify on the left wing. and yet they fall into all these similar narratives of Putin as the victim, Putin as anti-imperialist, Putin as the savior, Putin as the good guy, the idea of USA bad, Russia good. They unironically watch this. I used to watch Russia Today basically every day. I've been interested in international relations. I find it worthwhile to keep up with the talking points of the enemy. It's the same reason why I browse 4chan. It's the same reason why I am a member of free speech groups on Facebook. I like to keep up with the talking points of the alt-right, of fascists, etc. The Russia Today network, of course, is the state TV propaganda for international export of the government of fascist Russia. Telesur serves a similar purpose for Maduro, who's a Putin ally in Venezuela. Abby Martin, in particular, she used to work for Russia Today, and then she went to work for Telesur. So there's a pathway between these. They are interconnected. They all operate for the same anti-American purpose. So, well, it seems on face value, of course, that those narratives that I laid out would cater to the right wing. Turns out a lot of the left wing also agrees with Russian fascism and conducts apologia for Russian fascism. They might see Putin's statements about how he gets along with Kremlin shill Jill Stein of the Green Party of the USA and see that as progressive. And they might see her have dinner with him. And this is real. This actually happened. She had dinner with him and Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who was later fired after, I believe, a couple weeks on the job for security compromisation, basically, with respect to Turkey. The thing is, they see that, and they look at that, and they see, ultimately, oh, she's progressive, and Putin gets along with her, they're progressive. Well, no, actually, Putin, if you are against oil, or you think that climate change is a threat, I got news. Russia produces more barrels of oil per day than Saudi Arabia. They are the number one producer of oil in terms of barrels per day. They produce over 10 million barrels a day of oil. A lot of that is for export to Europe. So if you were all into the Green Party and everything, well, that's kind of hypocritical then to go and buy into this narrative. But they do. They watch people like Lee Camp on Russia Today, who you might say, oh, well, he offers very left-wing criticisms of the American government. Yeah, but he's getting paid by the leader of the largest fascist superpower in the world. So there might be an ulterior motive behind all of this. They might ultimately be serving either wittingly or unwittingly, as Yuri Bezmenov pointed out. He used to work for the KGB in the Soviet Union. That, no, actually, these people are basically useful idiots. And they play R, meaning the Kremlin's game, without knowing the Kremlin's outcome. And they're fools, in essence. Some of them are witting. Some of them get paid to do it. A lot of the people, though, totally unwitting, totally clueless on the issue. They do not understand the nature of Putin, the nature of the Kremlin system. They do not understand the nature of international relations. They do not understand brutality. They live in an echo chamber of insanity and delusion. And in this video, I'm going to be exposing and highlighting and cautioning against and trying to wake people up from this delusionary existence. So I titled this video, The Parable of the Domestic Rabbit and the Snake. And this, I feel, is a very apt metaphor. It's a very visually compelling metaphor. It's the sort of parable that draws directly to the dynamic at play between those who fall into this narrative, in essence, of Russia good, USA bad in the West, and Vladimir Putin and his fascist regime in Russia. So, I say the domestic rabbit here because if you have ever in the past watched videos, for example, or are aware of how reptiles work or anything, if you're aware of how nature works, if you ever watched nature videos, you know that snakes, if they're big enough, they will eat rabbits. And rabbits, generally speaking, they're fast. They have big teeth. They are capable of defending themselves. They evolved to defend themselves in the wild. And so if a snake goes after a rabbit in the wild, the rabbit, its eyes can see almost 360 around it, sees the snake, takes off, runs and gets into its hole, and runs for cover, basically. Because they're smart. And they know how that works. And they know instinctively, oh, that is going to kill me and eat me for food. They are brought up, they are of an awareness of how the wild works, where they can do this on their own. They have a BS detector. In other words, if they see a little reptile thing moving around, coming closer to them, they don't think, oh, that's cute, I wonder what it's going to do. No, they take off. They know exactly what's going on. Those rabbits, in other words, in that case, are what I would argue in this analogy. They are people who are ultimately calling out Russia, basically, in the West. They are people who, they get it. Now, of course, they also tend to be hawks. They have that rabbit nature to flee and say, no, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm not buying that BS. But they also then go and turn into hawks. I'm a hawk. Not necessarily on Russia. I'm not saying that we do war on Russia. I'm saying we try to bankrupt them. But we recognize that they are our enemy, and we try to counter their proxy states. And we acknowledge that the Cold War never ended. Whereas, if you happen to be in that rabbit's position, but you were brought up, say, for example, to be fed as meat for reptiles, say, well, all of a sudden, if you're brought up domestically, you're not going to have those same instincts. And so if a snake goes after a rabbit that's domestic, that's basically brought up for meat, the rabbit looks at the snake, sniffs the snake's head, and then the snake strikes. And as the rabbit is in the final seconds before the strike happens, the rabbit is curious. The rabbit thinks to itself, oh, maybe this is my friend. Maybe this is a new play pal. Maybe this is just going to be totally fine. This is exactly the nature of these lefty tankies, of a lot of the people that are confused on the alt-right. Basically, the only exception to this are the willing idiots. They are the alt-right, the fascists that know this, and they want to live in a dictatorship because they think it would be cool, or they think it would be in line with their values, or they think that they would become the supreme leader, even though we all know they would get shot just as fast as anybody else for being a political threat. But the thing is, the majority of these RT watching people, the majority of the Russia good, USA bad types, the Stephen Cohens, the Kyle Kalinskis, the Jimmy Dore, the Tanky Tulsi Gabbards, etc., they are basically domestic rabbits in this situation. And they look at that snake, KGB Vlad, the guy who literally, when he walks, he keeps his arm basically still by his side so that he maintains that instinct from the KGB that he can get out his Glock and shoot somebody. That guy, they see that guy as their friend. They see the guy who has prison camps, labor camps, gulags, the guy who executes people for being gay and tortures them beforehand, the guy who supports Bashar Assad in Syria and Kim Jong-un in North Korea and their states of terror. They see him as the good guy. They see him as, oh, let's be friends. Well, I got news. The second that you lend yourself into that position, and in this case, the act of the rabbit hopping over and sniffing the snake is the same as if we elect someone such as Tulsi Gabbard or Kremlin shill Jill Stein or a Jimmy Dore type to be president. That act of we need to be friends with Russia, we need to get along, Putin, we can work together, we'll be friendly, let's just let him do his own thing. He will devour you. He is not an idiot, okay? In fact, I'd be willing to wager he's one of the smartest world leaders. He's one of the smartest leaders right now, but he's one of the smartest leaders on the world stage in the last 30 years. He is competent. He is ruthless. He is efficient. And at the end of the day, he has no moral convictions. He panders to Christian orthodoxy. But we all know he's an atheist. And he just uses those symbols to legitimize why he has a bunch of Mercedes-Benz and a swag yacht and a bunch of mansions at the expense of the people who live 3 years fewer now than they did under communism, and who make $100 less a year now in real terms than they did 30 years ago under communism. In other words, he impoverished an entire country of 145 million people for his own luxury and his own bank account. The only way that he can do that and stay in power is if he plays the religious game, the myth of the good Tsar game. That whole idea of, I'm doing God's work, so don't question or investigate why my yacht costs $400 million and I officially make $200,000 a year. Don't do the math on that. This guy is not your friend. He is an enemy of America. He is an enemy of the West. He knows it. And the second that we have someone come in who's going to have that attitude, that mindset of the domestic rabbit, that curiosity, that naivete, that lack of mental fortitude, that lack of the ability to predict adverse outcomes, the ability to predict consequences. If we do that, boom, he will snatch up and devour the West, and it won't even take that long if we let him do it. Because Putin, well, he backs off if challenged, such as in Turkey, when Turkey shot down one of his aircraft that got too close to the border and by some estimates actually violated the border. He backed off because he knew that Turkey meant business. But when he took Crimea, he knew that Obama did not mean business. And if we go on and do even worse than Donnie Yester Vladimir Trump, because Donnie Yester Vladimir Trump is bad, but Tanky Tulsi Gabbard would be even worse. If we pursue that direction, if we do it on a societal level of, well, Russia's good, the Russians, they have the morality and we have the degeneracy and we need them, and let's get along with them, and let's ignore their meddling in our elections, and let's ignore the fact that they used weapons of mass destruction on British territory and killed British civilians as collateral damage when they were trying to kill somebody that defected from the KGB. Let's just ignore all that. Let's just say, well, Putin's a victim. He's a good guy. He's great. He just wants peace. He just wants to hug and get along. He likes animals. Guess what? Hitler liked animals too. He didn't like humans that much. He killed about 50 million of them or so in terms of what happened with the war. So, Putin pets a Siberian cat or whatever in the taiga, and there are all these propaganda pictures around. Oh, well, he must be a great guy. No, he's not a great guy. He's the snake. He's the snake in this example, and I got news. Once the coils of fascism are wrapped around you and they engulf the West, it is too late then to recoil and get out of it. Because if the domestic rabbit starts kicking, guess what? The snake just coils harder. The snake just applies more pressure until the rabbit's heart stops beating, and then it devours it for sustenance. That's how Putin operates. That's how this game is played. And to have all these people out here now on the left and right, the isolationists, the tankies, the alt-right, the fascists, the people that are curious about fascism, the people that are on the fence about it, the MRAs, all these various people, the Alex Jones fans, all these people that have come around to the idea of Putin as their savior. Guess what? He's not your savior. He's your devourer. And he will destroy you. And he will wreck your way of life, destroy Western society, ultimately undo the fabric of Western liberalism, the idea of rights, the idea of human dignity, the idea of rule of law, the protection from unwarranted arrest, the protection from torture, the protection from persecution, etc. And you might think that it's fine because you're not gay. Well, what happens if all of a sudden non-Slavic whites become a problem? Or what happens if people that have some sort of handicap of sorts have a problem? And you might say, of course, well, I'm not in a wheelchair. One, that's dumb because the secret police can put you in a wheelchair pretty fast because they don't just carry guns. They have all kinds of implements to do bodily harm. But on top of all of that, you don't know what your future looks like. Putin can confiscate your capital. You might be the biggest capitalist in the world, right? And say you watch people like Ben Shapiro and you watch Jordan Peterson and you think, oh, well, maybe Russia's good. Maybe I'll take a chance on Russia. Well, I got news. There was a guy in Russia with $15 billion. He was the richest oligarch. And the second that Putin thought that he wasn't singing enough praise, he wasn't being the yes man as far as he could, guess what? He took all the money away and had to flee to Switzerland. That's what happens. That's how this game works. And the difference is, if the West plays this game and the West falls into this delusion, there won't be a Switzerland to run to because Switzerland will be part of a Russian colony. And the West is a fragile island in an ocean of terror and an ocean of repression and an ocean of snakes. And you don't want to fall into that because unlike in World War II, where it took a massive war effort to undo the coils of fascism, and it took an external labor to undo the coils of fascism, there will be no other West that will come in and help us for making our stupid mistake, just like the West did to help the Germans for making their stupid mistake of choosing Hitler and allowing him to get power. That will not occur. There will be no external savior. What, you think communist China will come in and be your savior at that point if you decide, oh, actually, it turns out fascism isn't good for me. It turns out the fruits of my labor go to Putin's yacht, and I'm here in a gulag. It turns out, well, I need some neoconservatism now. I wish that there were a neoconservative power in the world. Well, no, you can beg for some neoconservatism then all you want. Guess what? It's not going to do any good because the United States and the Western powers will have been rendered colonies of the Russian fascist system, of the Kremlin. And communist China will not be your savior. North Korea will not be your savior. Assad will not step in and be your savior. Iran will not be your savior. All these countries will be totally cool with it and like it because it means that they don't have to worry about America anymore. And they have free reign now to do even more human rights abuses. And if by some chance communist China did go to war with fascist Russia and liberated them, well, that would basically be like when the Soviets liberated the German people from the Nazis. Well, okay, great. We get to be liberated from the Nazis. Oh, not great. Now we have to live under communism for 50 years. And, of course, in this scenario, it will be a lot longer than 50 years. It might be forever because there won't be a West to combat the system at that point. And so this is what I'm trying to get across. This meme, this narrative is prevalent on the internet. It is, to some extent, quite widespread now in mainstream television. There are a lot of people that embrace this narrative. Tanky Tulsi Gabbard is running for president, and she embraces this narrative. Donnie Yes Sir Vladimir Trump, of course, ran for president, won, and embraced this narrative. This is toxic. It is dangerous. It's stupid. It's outright stupid. It's insanity. And we should learn from World War II when Chamberlain went over to Germany and negotiated with Hitler and said, oh, Hitler wants peace. We can be friends with him. We can avoid a war. That's great. Guess what? People celebrated. People said, oh, people like Churchill, all these other people, they're just a bunch of warmongers. They want to kill people. Guess what? The war happened anyway. And it happened on less favorable terms. And instead of maybe 1 million people dying, if Britain had gone in and liberated Germany, guess what? About 50 million people died instead. 50 to 80 million people altogether died in World War II. And so that's a huge, huge amount of evidence out there on why the isolationists are insane, on why the isolationists are the dumbest people in the political discourse. If you unironically are out there and you watch people like Ron Paul, and you watch people like Alex Jones, and you watch people like Tanky Tulsi Gabbard and Kremlin shill Jill Stein, if you watch, InfoWars with Alex, lost my kids to own the Libs Jones, and you see all this and you hear all the praise of Putin and you think, oh, that's great. And then you turn on Russia Today and you see Peter Lavelle saying, oh, actually, Putin's the victim. And you see Lee Camp saying how it's actually the U.S. are the bad guys. And then you turn on Telesur and you see Abby Martin saying how, no, America's actually been the evil of the world and it's actually Russia's the victim and Venezuela's the victim. And then you go on 4chan and you see all the fascists talking about how great it would be if we just got rid of the degeneracy, and if Russia took over, you wouldn't have to use the pronouns or whatever anymore. All that, and you buy into it. And you adopt this progressive/fascist outlook and you embrace the Westphalianism and isolationism. And you agree and you make a deal with the devil and you say, yeah, I want to go and sniff that snake. I want to see what he's about. Guess what? He will reach his coil around you. He will strangle you and ensnare you until the lifeblood of the West is dead, and then consume and devour it. And that's how this game is played. That's their end goal. Don't be a useful idiot. That's the lesson of the parable of the domestic rabbit and the snake that I present in this video. And I am curious what you guys have to say about this. Do you see this as an apt parable here? Do you see this as perhaps too hyperbolic? I admit that this won't just happen instantly. It's a longer process. But we can see fairly quickly how the Soviet system became, to some extent, adopting of capitalist standards in the early 1990s. And so it's not too far-fetched to see how, if we all together agree to embrace Russian fascism, that the West could become adopting of that way of going about organizing society relatively quickly. I see another example of this, of course, in how quickly Germany in the 1930s went from being a relatively liberal democracy to being an outright fascist dystopia. And that largely happened with the approval of the German people. Because people get curious and they go and sniff snakes, just like the domestic rabbit. They are naive. They think, oh, the snake promises that I'm going to be secure. And the snake wants to hug me. I guess I'll be secure. Yeah, you're secure for about 2 minutes in the grasp of the snake. Your heart stops beating. You're gone. And the snake grows larger. That's how this works. And so, thank you for watching, YouTube. Let me know what you think.